The NBA season is heating up, and there's never been a better time to get in on the action. Whether you're looking to hammer a Pascal Siakam player prop or ride the money line with LeBron James and the Lakers, our partners at Sign Up Expert want to make sure you're ready to sweat your bets. With one of the best, Sign Up Experts is hooking up our listeners with one of the newest sports books available in Canada, Betano. Betano is home to some of the best odds when it comes to betting on the NHL and offers unique markets including virtual soccer and basketball. All you have to do to get started is scan that QR code on your screen or click the link in the description to register and place that first bet. Now, if you thought Damian Lillard being traded to the Bucks has been the best surprise of the season so far, wait until you try Betano. Don't walk. Run to check out Betano today. Scan that QR code or hit the link in the description to get started and start sweating your bets with the best. Always remember to bet responsibly and within your means. Viewers must be 19 plus to sign up for Betano. This is Nailing the Apex. I'm Tim Hauraney, and today joined by Jesse Blake. Jesse, what's happening, man?
I'm good. We got an exciting day of racing, despite the one guy taking the lead and holding it for the entire race. At least the rest of the field was exciting.
It was a good race. I actually really enjoyed it. A lot of strategy involved, a lot of tire management, a lot of thinking. Aston Martin, though, for me, Jesse, I mean, this was definitely the story of Sunday for sure. I mean, Alonso coming home P3 and Stroll coming home P5. What did you think, I guess, of the last 10 laps of this one?
Yeah, that's where you got to start, right? That's the biggest story of the day. It's the most exciting part of the race is Alonso's just mastery with being able to be on the right part of the track so that Perez can't really block him. And then the way he's controlling his battery and just recharging it when he needs to it and not deploying the energy when he doesn't need it. It was such an expert. It was a mastery in driving, and it was so cool to see. It was a throwback to like his heyday, and you can see that he still got it. And he had the third fastest car. Definitely not in the top three fastest in terms of just like it was Max, and then it was Lando, and then Perez probably has a faster car than him, but he finishes third. It's incredible.
Alonso captures his, I believe it would be his 8th podium of the season. I'm going to share my screen here, and let me know if you can see that.
I got it.
All right, cool. All right, so for those of you listening, my apologies. I'll try and talk you through. But if you want to watch, you can head on over to our YouTube channel, Nailing the Apex, and you can watch it there. But essentially, it's the last closing stages of the race. We're looking at some images that F1 posted on their Twitter channel. And this is an onboard shot of Sergio Perez about, I want to say, 10 to 12 laps from the end. And Jesse made a good point there when you were talking about lines. Mm-hmm. So if we just take a quick look at all of this, you can see that Sergio is like committed to the apex. So he's doing more of a V into these corners, where if you see Alonso's more on the outside. So he's U-ing the corners. So with this is experience, right? I mean, there's a couple things going on there. One is that Fernando's got clean air. So he doesn't have anyone in front of him. So it's not going to take a lot of energy out of the tire. Now, if there was someone in front of him for a few laps, the degradation on the tire would have been much higher. But since he's U-ing the corner, he's actually not asking that much from the tire. So he's leaving a little bit of life in it. Now, he did this for the last, 10 to maybe 14 to 15 laps to the end when he had Sergio behind him. And what this actually does is it keeps the tire alive, but Sergio behind, his tires are now being chewed up. Sergio obviously being the faster driver by doing this sort of V-shaped thing that he's doing with the car. Now, with that, he's got a lot more grip. He can get out of the corner better. But another thing with it is the fact that Alonso is actually saving up a lot of the battery. So he can use that to defend. And I think, and that's the most important thing. That's what was able to kind of keep Sergio behind him for so long is that he was able to use the battery, like Jesse had said, to just keep Sergio at bay. Now, Perez finally gets past him, and then this is actually on the way to Alonso trying to take third place back. Now, with this particular move, so Perez actually commits to turn one a lot sooner than when Alonso does. And so by doing that, Sergio actually, he gets a lot of understeer. He misses a bit of the apex. And so what that does for Alonso is that allows him to basically straight line almost turns 1 and 2 in Brazil. And if you can get the car in the right place, you can get back to power sooner than your competitor, because your competitor, Sergio Perez at this moment, is trying to defend against Alonso. Now, since Fernando was doing those U-shaped turns into the corner earlier, what that does is that allows Fernando to save up that tire. So when it comes down to the last lap of the race, that allows Fernando to finally, use the remaining life in the tire to get past him. So he gets that good run out of turn 1, good run out of turn 2. He also has the DRS, and he also has a lot of juice left in the battery. And that is what allows him to get past Sergio Perez on their way down to turn 1, 2, 3. I guess this would be 4. So Alonso gets past him, and then we've got the finish. Now, this is how the F1 posted this on their Twitter. Like, this is how close this was. It's pretty remarkable. Let's see here. This is the photo finish. So this is on F1's Twitter page. Incredible. Look how close that is, Jesse.
Oh yeah. Like that's so spectacular. It's awesome, crazy, right? To see.
That is 0.0. So that's 5/100ths of a second. Alonso beats Sergio Perez, the third place.
Pretty remarkable. For you, Tim. Just in terms of strategy and for the driver behind, would Sergio Perez have been better off waiting until the last lap to try and make a move? Because he made it on the second last lap, and then Alonso had the opportunity to pass him back. If he had just stayed behind in DRS range until that final lap and then took advantage of like a slipstream and the DRS on the final lap to try and make the move, would that not have been a better strategy for him?
Yeah, it probably would have been. But I think what Sergio's biggest mistake is that on that final lap, when they were doing that, and I showed that image of Sergio was over to the left, is that run down to turn 1. Now, when I went back and I watched the onboard footage from Sergio's car, and it was good because the camera was pointing backwards, so you could actually see Fernando and what he was kind of doing behind him. But essentially, by Sergio leaving the racing line too soon, and it looked like he was trying to protect the inside line against Fernando, but Alonso wasn't going there. Like he wasn't heading down to make a pass there because he just wasn't close enough.
Right.
And so I think like that was Sergio's biggest mistake, was just committing to turn 1 sooner than what he had to, because once he did that, he automatically opened himself up to turns 2, 3, and then the exits. So all the exits from those corners, he just basically opened the door for Fernando, being like, well, you're going to have more speed than me, and you're going to be able to get back to power sooner than I am. And lo and behold, Fernando was smart enough to keep the tire alive earlier in the stint. And that's what's so important when we're watching, Formula One, and everyone's like, well, why doesn't this driver just go and attack them? Like, keep attacking. Well, you can't. You have to manage the tire. You have to manage the degradation of the tire, because what you could potentially end up doing is coming back and getting them later. Like, that's kind of the idea. It's not like the racing back when I was racing, where you had a tire and you just friggin' leaned on it for the whole.
You're flat out the whole race.
Yeah, it's qualifying the entire race, man. Let me tell you, that was something. But this is just a little bit different. It's more management. You have to really think. for Fernando, he went through those stages, right, Jesse? I mean, like he had the era where it was just lean on the tire and quality laps the whole way, and now he's into this new era of F1 where he's been for quite a while, and just a smart. This is such a you said it best. It's a masterclass.
Yeah. No, you're so right about the driving strategy, because F1 these days is all technical, right? They run all these reports constantly, and the computers are churning out what to do and how to manage the tires based on the information that they've gained all weekend long and throughout the season and all the testing they do. And it's real technical now. And to be able to match that with expert driving, that's what the pinnacle of the sport and what to see. And he knew, based on the engineers telling him, hey, you have this much life in the tires, and that he's going to need it at the end of the stint. He was able to manage it all to perfection.
And like that, the team didn't even need to tell him like what to do. Like they weren't even like the team wasn't even thinking that. Like that's how good this guy is, man. Like that's how. Like, come on, like even Sergio wasn't figuring it out. Like you could see, or else he would have started like emulating a bit what he was doing. Instead, like Alonso's, doing these U shapes. He's crossing in front of him. He's creating turbulent air. He's degging Sergio's tires for him. Like it's just, it was brilliant, man. Like this was, I don't like to crap on drivers, but when they do something that's absolutely outstanding, like we got to talk about it, man. This is a stroke of genius. Like, I've watched a lot of great racing, but this is up there. And he was like totally chill during the press conference too. Like cause someone asked him like, how, where does this sort of podium rank for you and how excited are you? Or he's like, are you excited more than normal? And he's like, this is normal.
Yeah, I saw his comments about like he said he's not 20 years old anymore. He needs Perez to lay off of him. It was very funny. And the crowd recognized like how cool it was to have Alonso up on that podium. They gave him such a great standing ovation. Yeah. Like I heard some of the commentators mention like some of the wins he's had haven't been that raucous, and the Brazilian crowd was great on Sunday just to give him that really good send off,
Oh, absolutely. Because I think they also knew like what they witnessed, right?
Yeah.
Like I think they knew what they were seeing. I mean, that's the thing with Brazil and the Brazilian fans. Like they're very, like they know their stuff. They know their Formula One. They know their racing. Very passionate. And I love how they were chanting his name at the end as well. I also like good to see. Like I saw Sergio come in and he actually gave Fernando a hug, like following, and they both congratulated each other. And it's good to see that level of respect between those two drivers.
Yeah, what do you say in that moment? If you're Perez, it's just like that's something that you don't see from at any moment in racing. Just as you described it, he outthought everybody from in the paddock, on the wall to all the other drivers. Like, what do you say? But like, congratulations, and here's a hug. You won. Yeah,
exactly. Well, the thing is, like, we don't normally see that, right? Like, we don't normally see these drivers interact with each other. Like, very rarely do we ever get to see it. I mean, usually they only really see each other when they're on the driver's parade bus during Sunday, or we see them together during press conferences. But outside of that, it's not like they go and search for each other and hang out and all that kind of stuff. Like they don't do it. And so it was just kind of nice to see like two competitors, give each other their dues and respect as well at the same time.
Were you shocked by the car itself, as seeing Aston Martin's car perform that well after so many weeks and races where it's just been behind?
Yeah, especially for Lance. I mean, he's, I think for Lance and for Fernando, it's been very difficult, back half of the season. And I think for USA, like the US GP, Mexico Grand Prix, like those were, it doesn't get much lower than that, man. When you're, and you bring an upgrade as big as they brought to the US GP, and then all of a sudden, you're basically tearing both cars apart, starting from Parc Fermé. And, Lance had a great race there, finished, I think it was like P7. but he started from pit lane, and then I believe Fernando was retired in that race. I think it's definitely, this successful weekend has definitely lifted a weight off their shoulders for sure. Doing the experiments that they did at the US Grand Prix and at the Mexico Grand Prix, and obviously both cars starting from pit lane in the US GP, but then again in Mexico, Lance having to start from pit lane because they wanted to run more experiments on his car. I think at the end of the day, it's going to benefit them in the long run. Like when we get to next year, I think that once they start comparing all these different bits and pieces of what this car does, what it does here, what it does in altitude, what it does in this temperature, what it does with this tire, it's a lot of data that they've been able to gather, like terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data that they've been able to gather from, these past few weekends that is going to assist them for next season. And I think that's very crucial, Jesse. I just think it is. And I think with Brazil, it kind of seems like it's more of like a Zandvoort track, like it's the corners aren't as long. Obviously that's what the Red Bull really likes. It likes like good. I mean, it likes everything, but for the most part, like it really likes long, fast corners and, power tracks and that kind of stuff. It really excels at that too. And I think though, for Aston Martin, this was a track that actually started to really suit what they were doing as well. But it's good. It's good for the team, man. Like it's just, I cover the team a lot, right? So like when, they get success, I can see like just how big of a deal it is for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you're coming off the weekend. Last weekend, we chatted a little, and it was like a good weekend for Stroll. It was like he got back into a place where he should be in terms of his finish in the race, and then now Alonso gets this weekend. So you're carrying a lot of good momentum going into the final two races for Aston Martin, and that's good to see.
Yeah, and Lance also the faster driver this weekend too. I mean, we have to say it. Like he was catching Sergio and Fernando towards the end of this race. If there had been a few more. If there had been probably about 8 laps left, he probably would have gotten both of them. So like he managed his race really well on Sunday. He drove a great race. He really did. Very impressive from him this weekend. And I think like for his confidence, that's huge. And moving forward, we're going to go to Vegas. We have no idea what's going to happen there. So I think for Lance to try and finish the rest of this season, just with some good points. I mean, he doesn't need to go out and win races and podium stuff, but just chip away at the confidence, get the confidence back, so you end the season on a bit of a high, so you can take that with you into the off season, which is going to then motivate you to do more, maybe more driving, maybe different types of sim training. Maybe it's, you're training in different ways with different cars and on different tracks and different setups and things of that nature. So I think, moving forward, that will just keep a driver motivated when they end on a high. Like end the season on a high.
We got into some dark times in the summer with Lance Stroll and all the off track stuff that was like rumored, and then him being upset in the paddock and all that stuff. And so it's like this is where he needs to be, with a car that's performing the way he needs to. And going into the winter here, like that's a great takeaway for Lance, and I hope like it continues in Vegas and at the final race of the season too.
You know who didn't have a good weekend, Jesse?
No, don't tell me.
You know who it was.
Mercedes, I know.
It was bad, man. That was bad. I think that's, as Total Wolf said, following it's the worst weekend in 13 years.
Wow.
That's what he said.
Yeah. And it started so well in the sprint race. The first lap of the sprint, I'm like, hammer time, first lap.
I got the text.
He makes the pass on Perez. And from that moment on, I was like, no, they don't have it this weekend. And it wasn't there. And just seeing them go back on Sunday, just the car dropping back and everybody passing them. It's so unlike Mercedes for that to happen. It was like I was watching a different car and a different team. It was something really out of the ordinary for that team.
Hamilton finishing P8 and then Russell DNFing because of cooling issues. They ran into a problem with a lot of temperature issues with the engine, just engine spikes. And if they had blown that engine, that wouldn't have been good for them heading into Vegas. But I think for the team as a whole, just going the wrong way for setup wise. When you look at these sprint weekends, it's something that has really affected them this season when it comes to the W14. And if you go back to the USGP, I mean, obviously they were disqualified, but that was a sprint weekend. But then you look in Mexico, they were really strong in Sunday's race, but they were able to get so much practice in lead-up time that with this particular car, trying to really find the optimal ride height with it. The thing with this car is that it's very ride height sensitive. So how much the floor of the car meets the pavement or gets close to the pavement, etc. So ride height sensitive more than normal. They ran the car, way too high for this weekend. But I think there was also something wrong with it, like mechanically, and they couldn't really identify, what it actually was, and they were having a lot of issues with that. So at the end of the day, Jesse, I think they're, Total Wolf had mentioned it, but I think they're going to be really happy to see this W14 gone at the end of 2023 here.
Yeah, at the end of it, it's about looking ahead to next year, and it's a throwaway weekend because you can't really take much knowledge away from this other than we did the wrong thing. There's not much to gain in terms of moving forward about the right thing. And in terms of we mentioned tire management and all that with Alonso, and that they tried to not necessarily cheat their way into being competitive, but try and have some sort of strategy where they had Russell lifting and coasting all race, and same with Lewis, just trying to manage the tires so they can just kind of be competitive, and that still didn't work, and just the care they had to take with this car just to try and push it towards the end, and it never got going, and you saw from the sprint onwards, and even in qualifying where they didn't even have the greatest one lap time, it just never got it. And yeah, as a team, I don't know if you take anything away other than throw this weekend out, go to Vegas and try and redo it.
Such a stark comparison to this time last year when George Russell is winning the Brazil Grand Prix in a car that was just as difficult as this one is, and then you show up to Brazil this time around and they were totally lost. It shows you, I think, just how difficult and sensitive the W14 actually is. And I think it also shows that this is what this team has been having to deal with all season. Obviously, this is what they made, but it shows you that the car is so sensitive and it has a sweet spot in it that if this team doesn't get the time to find it or to work with it, then they really struggle. I mean, Russell almost got shot out the back before being retired. He was almost out of the points, man.
Yeah. No, he was going to fall way down if they kept him out there. And like you said, you couldn't risk the engine blowing up on track for them to keep running him out there. And I wonder if the team is going to look at sprint weekends differently. I don't know if we're going to discuss maybe there'll be changes next year to sprint format and how the weekend's kind of structured. But Mercedes in particular really hurts them not having all three of those practices and Sunday or Saturday being so jam packed with those two races. And all season long they've struggled with it. So they need to figure out how they go into their strategies next year with the W15 and see if they get a car that's just more consistent, because the Red Bull car, they know every time they're on the track, they know exactly what it's going to do, how it's going to react weekend in, weekend out. And Mercedes, it's so sensitive, and having that squeeze time format throughout the weekend on these sprint weekends, it hurts them so greatly that, it's a waste of a weekend.
I will be very interested to see how they bounce back in these next two races, because we don't have sprint weekends. But again, we're going to go to Vegas here, and it's expected to be really cold. Like, it's not like this isn't going to be a race where the conditions are normal. We're going to be dealing with a lot different. I mean, Pirelli's bringing the softest compound they have to offer to this race in Vegas. And I don't know how that's going to affect them. I don't know that's how, and they don't know either. Like, a lot of teams don't really know how these conditions in Vegas are going to really affect the car. But for Mercedes, I mean, I think there was just so much hype coming into this weekend about, Lewis only 20 points down from Sergio and, really wanting to get that P2 in the championship. And, Lewis had said at the Mexico Grand Prix that, he wasn't really too worried about getting P2 in the championship. But coming out of summer break, he was.
Yeah.
Because that's what he said. He said it. Yep. But at the end of the day, I think this whole team really wanted him to get second place in the driver's standings. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things that they just kind of wanted to throw that wrench into Red Bull, saying like, yeah, we still got you.
Yeah, no, it clearly meant something to him, and I think there's no denying that it would mean something. P2 with a car that's clearly inferior to the guy he's chasing, that would have been really impressive, and huge. It would have been even closer if he wasn't DNF'd. At the last race, unfortunately, he was disqualified. Sorry, at the last race. So. For Mercedes, it was something to chase, and at the end of this weekend, you sit here on Sunday afternoon, you're like, it's lost. You came into this weekend with such high expectations. I thought that first lap on the sprint, that race for the second in the championship is alive and well. It's going to be a great battle with the last two races, and now it's kind of gone. So it's a deflating feeling. If you're a Mercedes fan and for the team, because it would have been cool to have Lewis hunt down Perez for second there.
I mean, it's like, we had talked about it on the show before. I mean, like, Mercedes is dealing with this Frankenstein car, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like slapping things on it and hoping it works, or like, hopefully this works, and sawing out piece of the car. Like, they're literally sawzling parts of the car off in some races. Like, I just think that for them to not only solidify P2 in the constructors, but also getting P2 in the drivers, I think for them, that would have been huge motivation, like going into next year. And that's what they need, right? I mean, this is a team that's been winning for so many years, Jesse, and like to see how much they've struggled over the last 2 seasons is remarkable. Mm-hmm. I think for them, they can't even fathom it. And I think for Toto himself, like, he really takes this like hard, man. Like he really does. Like, when Sky Sports was trying to interview him at the end of the race, like, he just didn't even look like he wanted to be in. Like, it was just like, don't interview me. I don't want to talk right now. Like, and that's not usually like him, right? Like, usually he's pretty good that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the regulations are really tough. They've clearly, since these new regulations have come in, they haven't been able to get the car right to where they wanted to, and the last 2 iterations of the Mercedes haven't been what they've desired. And that's got to be extremely frustrating for a guy who only knows how to win, and now we're in another year of, hey, we're still behind and we want to be in the championship conversation, and we're not there. And it doesn't look like going into next season, it'll be like they'll be right up there trying to challenge. It'll take another half a season for this team to get back there. And when you have that outlook, when you look to the future and you're like, it's still, we're not there and we're still like so far behind, it can't help but be deflating for a guy like Toto.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel for him.
Absolutely. Ferrari, Carlos Sainz coming home P6, Charles Leclerc DNFing. So for Leclerc, he did say on the team radio that he had lost hydraulics, crashed in turn 6 in the formation lap. But the rear axle of the car actually locked up and snapped the car around on him. Leclerc did say, the hydraulics is what's ripped the steering wheel out of his hands, but it was an engine-related issue that locked the rear wheels, and essentially that's what created the crash on a formation lap. Nonetheless, but
it was unbelievable to watch. Just they're going around, and then all of a sudden somebody's in the wall.
I was quite surprised by that, but I I like this little, I don't want to call it a rivalry, but between Leclerc and Sainz, those two in the Drivers' Championship, I really like this. 2 races left. Sainz has got a 22-point lead over Charles Leclerc in the driver's standings. Sainz finished ahead of Leclerc in 2021, but then Leclerc finished ahead of him in 2022. And now in 2023, it looks like Carlos Sainz is probably going to finish ahead of Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, and it's something we've talked about like throughout the season, a little bit here, a little bit there, but Ferrari has to look at it as we don't have one driver and a 2 driver. We got a 1A and a 1B, and they're interchangeable right now because both guys are performing at the best of their abilities, and I think they're doing great jobs with the car all season long, and I don't think one is substantially better than the other. I think Sainz has performed just as well as Leclerc, as you can tell by the points, and Leclerc's right there with Sainz. And I don't think Ferrari can say like we favor one driver or the other. And it's going to be a difficult conversation going forward if one of them thinks that they're ahead of the other one. And I wonder how they're going to fight it out for the next years to come.
Leaving Mexico, I had the opportunity to talk to Jacques Claire, and he's, for those of you listening, he's very high up at Ferrari, and even he seemed surprised at just how good Carlos Sainz has been this season. And for me, like, I was actually kind of like, whoa, like, I was like, I've always been up on Carlos. Like, I know what this guy can do. And so even like, kind of getting that feeling from him, I was like, man, I'm like, you got like 2 really great drivers, dude. Like,
yeah.
Like, I don't know how you're gonna make that call where it's like, okay, who's 1A and who's 1B, or who's number 1 and who's number 2? I mean, because you have to wonder if that decision is going to come down the pipeline, and if it does, like, what happens next season? You've got a really competitive car, and like Sainz is like on it, and so is Charles Leclerc, who, for Leclerc, they've spent a lot of money in his career to get him there. So
do you let them figure it out themselves on the track, like, or do you have to, as a team, make a decision and like at least lean towards one direction of where you're going to put the more resources and money?
Yeah, that's the question, right? I mean, one of the things that with Sainz is that I think he does a lot of off tracks. I know I'm not saying Charles Leclerc doesn't, but for Carlos Sainz, he does a lot of off track work, like when combing through data on what else can he do to make this car a little more his, and how can he get it into a spot where he can extract the performance from. Mexico was not the greatest race for him, but he still managed to eke out some decent points. And then again today, like, he couldn't keep up with Stroll, but he still managed to not cook the tire to try and keep up with Lance. Like, he was just like, yeah, Lance, I just can't keep up with him. I'm not going to roast the tire. I still got to hold on to P6 here and get these points. Like, he's smart that way. Like, when it comes to thinking through the race, where you've got Leclerc, and I've said it on here before, like, over one lap, Leclerc is one of the fastest, if not the fastest over one lap in Formula One right now. But when it comes to the race, Carlos just really thinks it through, Jesse. Like, he really thinks it through. Like, yeah,
the races aren't won over one lap, right? Like, they're not won in qualifying; they're won over the length of an entire race. And Carlos Sainz, in my eyes, has been, I think, the more consistent driver. You kind of know what you expect out of Sainz as opposed to Leclerc, but Leclerc's also faced a lot of car troubles, and I think more car troubles than Sainz has faced over the length of his time at Ferrari. So it's such a tight battle in terms of like who you want to favor going forward. So I don't know, that's gonna be fascinating to watch.
And Ferrari, 362 points. They are only 20 points behind Mercedes for P2, Ferrari in P3. Then you've got McLaren. They're not going to catch Ferrari. McLaren, P4, 282 points. Aston Martin, 261 points in 5th. And then Alpine with 108. Alpine isn't catching Aston Martin. But Alpine did have actually a decent Sunday with Pierre Gasly coming home 7th. Esteban Ocon coming home P10. Some solid points there from both drivers, which is good to see. But I mean, Jesse still with Alpine, just a, yeah. I think for myself, I expected a little bit more from them this season, considering what they did last year, and we're just not getting it,
Yeah, I know Gasly in one of the post-race interviews, he said this was one of the best weekends we've had all season long, just on how the car performed and how they finished on Sunday. But yeah, when you saw like how AlphaTauri has looked all weekend long, I expected that out of Alpine at points of this season, where it's like, Ocon's up in P3 or something crazy, but we never really got that all season long. But I think they've made a lot of strides in that they know they have the drivers for the future, and that if the car is there, that they'll be able to perform with it.
AlphaTauri, you did mention, we talked about Hamilton, who came home P8, but Yuki Tsunoda finished in ninth, man. That's a hell of a drive from Yuki. I mean, really good stuff. Like, he did make a mistake in the midst of the race, but I thought that his first stint and also the second stint, and just how long he was able to kind of keep the tire alive and stretch the stints. That's a really good drive from him. Smart drive, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even in the sprint, I believe it was sixth he finished.
That's a good question. Let me look it up
in front of me, but
pretty sure he was.
Yeah, like even that sixth. There you go. Yep. Yuki, he had a car that performed well all weekend long, and he took advantage of it. And I think that's something we wouldn't have seen from the Yuki of the past, where he isn't more of a confident driver. And this weekend, when he had the tools with him, he had a great performance. And I think it's such a positive thing to take away. And I think we've been waiting a long time for this team to come up and do something like this, because I think like they have a lot of the Red Bull resources, and AlphaTauri obviously has a lot of money behind it as well. And we gotta see more of this, and it's positive. It's a positive direction for Yuki going into next season. And Daniel too, like the earlier in the weekend was a little bit of a struggle, but today, after the crash, competing in last place with Piastri there, it was a good drive from very last, being a lap down.
He was, he was swearing up a storm at the end of the sprint race. I went over and watched his onboard audio following the sprint, and he was like cursing the DRS line, like just absolutely cursing it. I think he was expecting, he wanted it to be moved a little bit sooner rather than later. And so I think he felt that he probably could have got a little bit more out of that one. But Logan Sargent coming home P11. Good drive from Logan in this one. Just shy of scoring a point. But things starting to click for Logan. The pace, he's not that far off at some points of Alex Albon, who, this season has been in another league. Nico Hülkenberg, P12. Daniel Ricciardo, P13. Oscar Piastri, P14. He is the last of the runners, finishing 2 laps down for, McLaren. I think for this weekend, great that Lando got some solid results, but for Oscar is definitely a bit of a learning weekend for him.
Yeah, and on Sunday, that's through no fault of his own for him and Daniel. They're just casualties of a bad crash there on lap number 1 coming out of the start. And I thought they both had fast cars, and I think the McLaren, if it doesn't take damage, he can kind of make his way through the field, and have a better result. It's just unfortunate, I think, for Piastri, but yeah, it's a learning weekend for him.
I think as a team, for McLaren, they've taken massive steps forward. Lando Norris has been, I believe, the second highest scoring driver in F1 since they brought the big upgrade in Austria, if I'm not mistaken. And if I am, I'm sure I'll get corrected in the compliments section. And McLaren, the second highest scoring team since Austria as well. I think for Norris in this race, he took a shot at battling Verstappen, Jesse. I mean, he did off the start. I think for him, that gave him confidence, and the team confidence that they could do something special for next season. But, Norris, I think he knew that he could take one shot at Max off the start for a few laps, but if he had have tried it too many times, then, that would have been his race finished. He would have compromised his entire race, and I think he would have ended up being swallowed up by Alonso and Sergio, because I think putting that much effort into trying to take a win away from Max Verstappen just really kills the tire altogether, and it just wouldn't have worked out for him. I think he made the smart decision, just kind of trying it once and then pulling the plug on it. Like, it's the only thing he could have done.
Yeah, you're going up against the faster car and the Red Bull, and they all know how it's going to perform. So it didn't make sense trying to battle there. Yeah. I would have liked to see it last longer than like the second corner, for Lando in first place there. But what can you do? Because it was inevitable either way. If he held on for a couple laps to start there, unless he got like some lucky break with a safety car in the middle where the pit stop just kind of worked to his advantage. But even that didn't happen. So
there was some chat about the sprint weekends throughout, Saturday. There had some news coming out about the format for next year and how are things going to get changed around for it. First off, Jesse, just want to get your thoughts on the sprint weekends as a whole. Like, we've talked about it before in the past, but I think they do need something done here, a little bit of a refresh of some kind, because for me, it's just not working.
Yeah, I think we've had enough kicks at the can here to know that the way it's set out right now isn't how it should be. The sprint shootout, it's fun, but and then having the race and having the Saturday just as a full day, it's a cool little idea, but it doesn't really work for the teams, and you're asking a lot from the fans. Having qualifying on the Friday and then the full day on the Saturday and then again on the Sunday, and the teams don't seem to like it. The fans seem to be really confused by how everything's playing out. So something needs to change. And I don't know. Do you have any ideas on what you want to see going forward?
Yeah, there is. Actually, I got an email from a person by the name of Todd Dalglesh. I'm not too sure where Todd is from, but he had submitted a question to me through my website, and he had said he is basically a suggestion of what he would want to see done. But he said, my suggestion for the F1 sprint format would be Friday, you have free practice 1 and free practice 2. Saturday morning is your standard race qualifying. Then you take the car into Parc Fermé after that. And then he says, however, the race qualifying, so I believe he means for the sprint qualifying, would also be used. For the sprint. Oh, here he goes. Okay, so for the race qualifying, so for the qualifying they do on Saturday morning, that would also be used for the sprint format by utilizing reverse grid. So whoever qualifies first to 20th, you reverse that for the sprint race. So for Saturday, you're going to do your qualifying for Sunday's race, but you're going to take those results and you're just going to flip them around for the sprint that would happen later. And he said this would avoid the problem of a separate sprint qualifying with reverse grids and teams not fully committed to sprint qualifying. He said points for the sprint race. So you get 6 points. So from first place to sixth place, you get 6 points all the way down to 1 point. Any driver starting 10th to 15th and making it into the points gets a bonus 1 point as well. Any driver starting 16 to 20th and making it into the points gets 3 bonus points. And he said, I hope you consider this suggestion and are able to get it to F1.
I don't know about that part.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one, Todd, but I appreciate you taking the time to send me that email. It went very in depth. What do you think about that? I actually, it's a great idea. I think the points thing that he makes in the email, I think that can be a little confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where it went a little far. But up until that, like, I was on board because the biggest issue is that sprint shootout, the extra qualifying, and not having regular qualifying on Saturday morning, where everybody's just used to having qualifying on Saturday morning. We should have it there, and then another qualifying on top of that doesn't make sense. So yeah, the reverse grid ideas, that's something you've brought to the table as well before, and I think it's a fantastic, it's a fun little idea. You know, you get some of the other cars to actually get out in front and have a lead, and you can see if they can maintain it and do some fun strategy with that to try and hold the lead. So yeah, I'm a big fan of reverse grid. I'd love to see in F1, and yeah, have one qualifying on a Saturday morning that's qualifying for the race on Sunday. That's what makes most sense.
Yeah, I think, like, I can't remember what George had kind of threw a little suggestion in there this weekend as well, kind of like he said, like, whatever you do, you can't interrupt, like, just how important qualifying is.
Yep.
And he's right, because, like, that's when the cars are the fastest. That's when the drivers are, like, really on the absolute limit with these things. Like, that's why we got to see some special stuff this season, including, like, Max Verstappen in Suzuka and Max Verstappen in Monaco.
Yep.
Like, those are pretty special laps. And so I think, like, you've got to prioritize. You got to prioritize your Grand Prix, and you got to prioritize your qualifying. And I think if you're going to start doing sprints, I like Todd's idea here. I just think there needs to be more on the line when it comes to the sprint races, because there's not enough on the line. Do you remember 2021 and Brazil, and just how important it was for Lewis to, like, make up the ground that he had to make up in the sprint race in Brazil, just so he could, like, keep the championship, like, going. Right. It was huge, man. That was such an important moment between those two, between Verstappen and Hamilton in that championship season. Like, so important, Jesse. And I think you need that. You still need to have that jeopardy, like, on the line when it comes to these things, because for me, I would like to see that sprint race set the grid for Sunday. That's what I want. I would like to see that. But I think like doing your qualifying normally, and then either reversing the grid, or you just don't do qualifying at all. You just do two free practice 1, free practice 2, and then you go Saturday, you're going to go sprint race, you're going to flip it, championship order. So whoever's at the back in the championship starts at the front. Whoever's at the front in the championship starts at the back. Into your sprint race that sets your grid for Sunday.
Okay.
Don't even do qualifying.
And then no points would be handed out for the sprint, and the sprint would just act as qualifying.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't mind that either. You know, I think that's a good way around just the entertainment factor, you know, because like Saturday morning, okay, it's not the qualifying, but at least it's qualifying in sprint form, which is just as entertaining. Yeah, I wouldn't hate either of those ideas.
I think, like, and I just keep coming back to it, but I just think it's just so important to have jeopardy on the line. And if you want to do these sprints, like, they have to mean something. I mean, right now, Saturday means absolutely nothing. Like, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a day.
Yeah,
it really is. Like, being at the U.S. Grand Prix, like, on the media side, like, there's still not that media exposure. Like, what story are you telling?
Yeah, like, do you find the fan reaction too on that Saturday was a little lackluster as well?
Big time.
Yeah,
big time. I mean, I think once that there's some jeopardy in it, once it actually means something, once it has an impact on the weekend, you know, you're able to build that storyline, tell that storyline. So when people get to the track, like, they know, right? They know that, like, oh, you know, shit, I got to get to the track on Saturday because this actually means something. Like, we got to see it. We got to see what happens, or we got to see this sprint because it's actually going to have an impact on these drivers in the weekend. And I think, you know, that's really, really important. But like I've always said, Jesse, you know, I appreciate the fact that F1 is trying something. Really do. Actually do.
we can put that out there. It's good that they're trying new things because there's a lot of sports that don't try at all and they get stagnant. So it's good that they're trying.
God. Okay, let's go with the debrief. We got some questions coming in. First one is from @BuyItGraham. It will be interesting next year seeing how Lando and McLaren can do. It was an excellent drive by him today. It was. Do you think it's possible that Sergio Perez gets let go by Red Bull and then signs Lando for 2024? I know he's under contract, but it doesn't seem to matter in F1.
I think that's pretty unlikely to happen, right, Tim?
Yeah, it's very unlikely that will ever happen. I mean, he makes, there is a good point there where, Lando is under contract. And the thing is that what happens to Lando once that contract is up? Like, does he stay at McLaren or does he go somewhere else? If he goes somewhere else, I mean, where would that be, right?
Right.
I think, like, for him, I believe it's like he is a 4-year. He signed a 4-year extension. I think it was in 2022. So it's not. I believe he's not up until 2026, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. And you would know better than I would, but I think Zach Brown would go rent a Brinks truck and drive it to Lando Norris's house before he would let him ever leave McLaren.
I got a wild theory, and it's wild, okay? But, hear me out here. So it's the end of 2025. Lando's contract is up. Audi, who will be moving into Formula, and I know there's storylines out there that Audi is not, that they're pulling the plug on their deal with Sauber, and that it's not, going to be happening, and blah, blah, blah. But, a high-end Alfa Romeo official this weekend stomped out those rumors. Audi's coming in. It's just the level of participation that they can have at this moment with Sauber is limited because they have the deal with Alfa Romeo. So they can't just start bringing in a different car manufacturer and replacing the current car manufacturer that's slapped all over the car. And so that is why they're saying that their involvement within Sauber is limited. But as the years progress and as we get closer to 2026, we'll start to see more of Audi being sprinkled in throughout this team. But I think that's a team that would want to come after a driver like Lando Norris. One, because of the talent, obviously, but he'll be still relatively young, tons of experience, very marketable. I could see Lando going to a team like an Audi in 2026. And that's where I take a look at Patricio Ward, who Zach Brown told us on this podcast that they have already applied for Patricio to get his super license. So Patricio Ward races for Arrow McLaren in IndyCar. And I think by the time we kind of get to 2026, who's to say that Sergio Perez is still in Formula One? It's a long way to go. I mean, Sergio's been in F1 forever. And, it might be time that he calls it quits. And what's to stop McLaren from bringing in a driver like a Patricio Ward to the team? And that's where I think, like, Zach is so smart when it comes to his drivers, man. Like, he's just so good at looking into the future where he's got Oscar Piastri locked up till 2026. I mean, he's not letting him go anywhere. That guy's incredible, right?
Right.
So if Lando's going to leave McLaren, I think that's where he would end up going, not to Red Bull. Why would you want to go and be Max Verstappen's teammate?
Yeah. We've seen in F1 that's one of the toughest gigs in the sport is being second to Max at Red Bull.
That's the worst idea ever because you're not getting a car that's like meant for you, man. Like you're literally going to be having to figure out how to change like your driving style to suit something. You better hope that your driving style suits what Max does because it's just so specific. It's so unique. It's incredibly fast, but if you're Lando Norris, why would you want to leave somewhere where they're like going to tailor the car for you?
Mm-hmm.
You never leave that.
You go to a team like Audi where the entire brand can be built around you because you're the new star driver at this new team.
100%, man. We got another question here from F1 Ryan _SK. Can you provide an explanation for the first lap penalty against Daniel Ricciardo and Oscar Piastri? A comment. F1 should have one sprint a year, and it should be at Brazil. A great track for it. Only once a year makes it special, so drivers look forward to it and fans actually want to watch it. Now, the Ricciardo and Piastri, I actually didn't receive anything from the FIA in regards to those two for this particular race. They weren't put under investigation from my knowledge. Jesse, did you see that?
I think they're referring to when the race was restarted, those two had to start from the pit lane because of all the damage they had. I think that's what they mean by penalty, right?
Okay, yeah, because they didn't get anything during the race. I didn't even receive anything from the FIA, and the FIA didn't tell me about it. So the FIA actually sent me a message in regards to that. So essentially what ends up happening is you got to fix the cars, right? Like these cars that were involved in the crash, and obviously for both Oscar and for Daniel Ricciardo, brought the cars in to get them fixed up. Rear wings for Danny Rick, obviously, and then I believe similar for Oscar, he still had extra damage, Mclaren had said, to the car following, like during the race. Like he was still battling a car that had taken damage that they just couldn't fix, but they could make the car safe for it to go out and race. But the message that I had received from the FIA was the fact that since the cars were being worked on in the garage during the red flag period, they have to be, they're permitted to leave the pits. So they're permitted to leave the garage. They're permitted to follow the cars back out on a formation lap, but they're not allowed to take the grid. They have to start, they had to return to pit lane, and they had to take the restart from that pit lane because essentially the cars would have been retired anyways. So technically they're kind of out of the race.
Right.
So essentially that's what that kind of boiled down to and why that is. And that's not anything new. That's been done before. It's funny. I received a text like from someone complaining that, you know, why, actually, I received a couple of texts, people complaining about why they're allowed, like why the teams are allowed to work on cars that are damaged. Like there was a couple of texts that I got because of that, but like I don't see anything wrong with it. Like my only thing is, Jesse, is like changing the tires. That's my thing. It's like during these red flags, why change? Why are they allowed to do that? And like I understand the damage. I like that they can fix the damage.
You think they shouldn't be allowed to change tires? Because
No.
I think that would fall under working on the car. I think like everything working on the car is the same, from changing the tires to putting on a new front wing to repairing the rear wing. I think that's all kind of the same. So as long as you're in the pit, you can do whatever you want is kind of how I look at it. But like it's interesting if you say, hey, you can't change tires under a red flag, because then you're throwing a whole other wrinkle into it.
I like how you're like poking holes in the rules because you're like, technically that is working on the car. I'm like, you, sir, should be in Formula One.
Yeah, I guess I think like FIA, you know.
I just don't like the fact that it's kind of like a free pit stop.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't like that because
I don't know. I see it as you're in the garage. That's where you do your work on the car. You can do whatever you want.
But usually they're supposed to be working on. So if you're going to work, you can work on the car in pit lane. So when they do the red flag, you have to kind of come in your respected positions and line up in pit lane, and you can you can change the tires there. You can work on the cars there if you got a little bit of damage. For Ricciardo and Piastri, obviously they had to be hauled into the garages because essentially thought their days were done. But seeing as how the red flag came out and it was going to take so long, they were able to work on the car. But since they had already put them into the garage, they were already pretty much like, you're out of the race. So starting from pit lane when we do this restart. But to work on the cars in pit lane during a red flag, I'm cool with. It's the changing of the tires that I am not good with that, because it's kind of like a free pit stop where it's like, well, you didn't really earn it.
Right.
So it's like, you're the ones who decided to pit like under a safety car, VSC, before they threw a red flag, whatever it is. Like, you already did your thing. Like, you can't come in and like swap the tires around. You just can't do it. That's my problem. I got a huge problem with that one, but that's for another show and another day, Jesse.
All right. We'll debate it in the future. I think it's all fair. You're in the pit, change your tires.
Man, thanks very much for doing this, Jesse. I really appreciate it, man. Let everybody know what you got going on and where they can find your stuff. We just did a Jesse versus, actually.
Yeah. No, I'll shout that out. Go to youtube.com/sdpn. That's our YouTube channel there. And I do a little series called Jesse Versus. During the summer, I played golf with a bunch of like sports media personalities in the Toronto area. And then I've been expanding to other sports. And I did one where I played a floorball accuracy shot challenge with Steve Dangle. And then Tim was kind enough to join me and play video games. For the first time in his life, he played an F1 video game, and we did that. So search up. I'll link it in the description. Tim and I playing the F1 video game. And Tim, you did a fantastic job for someone who's never played an F1 game before.
I think I was 17 seconds off of Max Verstappen. I don't know if I did a good job.
That's pretty good. Piastri and Ricciardo were more than a lap away, so you did better than them.
Yay, I did better than the AI. Yeah. It's a fun game, but like we discussed on it, like we need to do the steering wheel in the pedals. So maybe when I come back from Vegas, we'll set that up. Yeah. Thanks again, Jesse, for doing the show. Really appreciate it. Also, for those listening, go over and watch SDP. Those guys have a great show. It's awesome, man. You guys got me hooked. I'm like watching you guys now every Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Oh yeah, so I don't know. Are you a big Leafs fan? Like, is that where your hockey fandom lies?
No, I don't like hockey at all.
But we got you hooked, so we'll get you into being a Leafs fan.
I like, I'm a huge basketball fan. Always have been ever since I was a kid. And I follow basketball and football like very closely, especially NFL. Like I follow very closely. And right now, Jesse's actually beat it. Who are you playing in fantasy right now? Because you're absolutely crushing them.
I'm playing Grav. He's a NHL YouTuber, if you're not familiar with Grav. But yeah, I think he's given up a little on the season. I got to text him to be like, hey, you got to set your lineup fully each week.
Yeah, because I was like...
He's in last place, and I think he's given up.
I know. I was looking at who was on his bench, and I'm like, who is it? Like, why is Jesse absolutely steamrolling this team right now? And I'm like looking through. I'm like, why isn't that guy starting? Yeah.
So yeah, you need to commit. Even though you're in last, you need to keep playing fantasy football. That's a rule.
Yeah, 100%. I'm big fan of SDP, and you guys actually got me paying attention to like NHL. Where last night, like I don't watch Toronto Maple Leaf games. I actually turned it on just so I could like simulcast Steve's live game, like play by play.
Watch party. Yeah.
Watch party. There you go. So like Steve Dangle, the host, one of the hosts of SDP, he does these like watch alongs for those racing fans that are listening. You probably have tuned out by now, but if you haven't, he did this watch along last night where he was watching the Maple Leafs game, commenting on it, and so like I decided to like watch both and see how good. I thought it was really good. Like,
he does such a fantastic job with that stuff. Like I couldn't sit there and talk for 3 hours just straight to a camera. It's insane the way he's able to do it, and it's entertaining throughout the entire thing. So anyways, I appreciate the kind words, Tim. Like, thank you. I'm glad that we're turning you into a mini hockey fan.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you definitely are. Like, I've got like a Sidney Crosby jersey and everything. Like, I was a Pittsburgh Penguins fan when I was younger, Mario Lemieux fan. But like, I think for me, I started getting out of hockey probably 10 years ago, and I haven't really followed it as closely. I find like with hockey, it's kind of like I liked the rough and tumble nature of like the 90s. Like, I just like that. I mean, I know like there's probably some hits out there and stuff that are a little, but like this form of hockey is really fast. I guess it doesn't have, well, it's still physical, but not as physical, I guess.
It was a different sport in the 90s, like 100%. There's a couple different eras of hockey. Like there's a really the old one from like the 60s, and then there's an era from like the 80s where there's kind of no rules and all the games were 8-7. Then the 90s had a distinct like rough hockey where there was low scoring, but everybody got punched in the face all the time. There were giant hits where guys got blindsided, and that was a distinct version of hockey. And a lot of people fell in love with the game then. So it's interesting to hear that that's kind of the hockey that you grew up on as a Canadian kid. But you can only pay attention to so many things, and you spent those years as a pro race car driver. How invested can you be in other sports?
Yeah, I think like once the 2000s rolled around, it's kind of, I would say around 2003-ish. That's kind of like when I really stopped following all sports except for like basketball and NFL, because it's just so like my racing career at that point was taking off, and it was just so, I was so invested in it, and it took up so much time that you just kind of lose track of all the other things, right? So it's kind of like that for me. But I mean, I like that you guys have kind of got me back into it, where now I'm like following some of these storylines, and like, Adam's got this huge obsession with Michael Andlauer and the Ottawa Senators.
And
I'm like, well, what is this all about? And I'm like, it's got me like digging a little bit more, reading a little bit more. And I think one of the things that I've noticed when it comes to like being in the States with like NHL, because like this Airbnb I was staying at in Texas during the Austin Grand Prix, like the ESPN actually did a really nice job of blowing up the stars. Like, they made it more like Austin Matthews, versus Connor McDavid or whatever the game, they weren't playing each other at the time, but whatever the matchup was, they did a nice job of actually like bringing the stars out. And I think when you look at like the NBA, that's something that ESPN has done with the NBA, where it was like pumping up the stars,
Yeah. For 20 years, the NHL wasn't on ESPN, and when ESPN doesn't have the rights to something, they ignore it. So in the last 2 years, the NHL is finally back on the biggest sports network in America, and it's going to be great for the game because they market it in creative ways like that. It's very good to see, and it's cool to hear that you saw that as somebody who's like a casual, and you're down there briefly, and you already saw that evidenced on ESPN. That's cool.
Yeah. It was good. It got me interested. Like they got me hooked for some of the games where I was like, I came home from a long day at the track, and I'm kind of just like, not much on TV. I'm like, I'll see what ESPN's got on. I'm like, they got hockey. I'm like, do I really want to watch like Colorado Avalanche and like whatever Dallas Stars? And it's like, no, Nathan McKinnon this and all that. I'm like, all right. I'll watch. All right. So
that's how you get into things. Exactly. Through the personalities, right?
100%.
This conversation's funny because it's kind of the reverse conversation that you and I had like 2.5 years ago now, when I was watching Drive to Survive and falling in love with all of these personalities and getting into F1. And then now it's like you're seeing all these hockey personalities and you're starting to watch hockey again. It's really cool.
100%. Jesse, thanks very much for taking the time, man. I really do appreciate it. Those wanting more Nailing the Apex, you can get Nailing the Apex wherever you get your podcasts. Please head over to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, write a review. Let us know how we're doing. You can also watch past episodes over on YouTube as well. We'll be back later this week, and also head back to Thursday's episode, or I believe it was probably Friday's episode that we dropped with Daniel Ricciardo. It was a great episode, great conversation, and I think you'll really like it a lot. And until later this week, we'll talk to y'all later.